Hello everybody, if we could make a quick start on this final session of the day, and thank you for your patience and putting up with it. And I'm really kind of sorry that the perhaps for you the most boring part of the session is right at the end here, because you've obviously put in a good shift already. I didn't mean Malcolm and Ellie, obviously. I meant the sort of academic subject. Oh God, I'll just shut up. Okay. My name is John Cloak, and I am the representative, or one of the representatives of the LCEDN, as you can see, www.lcedn.com, Low Carbon Energy for Development Network, which is a new community. I would say new, it's only 2 years old, that started up to try and amalgamate the energy and development communities, or renewable energy in particular, development communities in the UK. Not just the academic communities. We have on our database of some 220 members representation from the private sector. We have government sector, the policy sector represented. We have non-government organisations. So please, particularly you people from the commercial sector, go and visit the site, have a look, see what you think, and sign up for membership, because what we're trying to do is to put together some of the themes and the strands that have been talked about in terms of looking at markets, looking at financial models, looking at research and how it gets done and so forth, and hopefully we can be of some interest and service to you. Which brings us kind of to the central question of the session: how can academic research and evidence support the activities of SMEs working in emerging economies? So just by very good fortune, I happened to come across a paper the other day by the lovely World Bank, which came out this year, talking about it in very positive terms, and this is about clean tech rather than just energy tech, but SMEs in particular and in relation to that sector, in very optimistic terms about the amount of investment that will be made available for companies such as the ones that are represented here over the next few years. So according to the World Bank then, 6.4 trillion is likely to be made available over the next decade. I don't know how they arrive at that estimate. You need to talk to the World Bank about that. But 1.6 trillion of that total offers an opening for small and medium-sized enterprises. So that, my friend, is obviously the crux of the matter and where we're at with this particular event here we're having today. Well, what kinds of things are they talking about, particularly with relationship to energy? You can see from the diagram here, you have got over in China onshore wind, solar PV and electric bikes. Who knew? In India, onshore wind, solar PV and wastewater. Wastewater and water in general comes into this quite a lot. Wastewater, small hydro water here in North Africa, wastewater, water, solar CSP, and as you can see. So obviously the World Bank has gone to some considerable effort to kind of calculate the wheres and the why-fors of these markets, where they're going to open up, and trying to look at what kind of support and what kind of encouragement SMEs will need to cover these kinds of markets. And I just took this example out of the document as well. If anyone wants a copy of this PDF, by the way, I've got it, so you can have a look at it if you email me. You've got innovation activities. What do these SMEs do? What is their experience of working in these markets? And pardon me if I gallop through this a bit, but obviously we're a bit pressed for time. You've got innovation activities undertaken by clean technology SMEs in Kenya, and here's a graph of there. Research and development is an enormous amount of their activity in what they do. Market analysis, demonstrating new services or products, as you'd have thought, business development and sales, raising funding. And what sort of things are they looking at? What are the problems they experience? Well, take this example from India. Things like access to finance, oddly enough. A lot of what we do in the academic groups in which I work, and which are not just academic groups, I hasten to add, but also involved directly in products itself, are looking at new financial models and access to finance. So there are all kinds of things down here in both these innovation activities, i.e. the sorts of things that companies have to do to penetrate these markets, and the kind of barriers that they experience, access to finance and so forth, that we are already working in, and there is a community of academics across the UK working with policy, working with NGOs, working with private sector actors who can start to help companies work on those areas. So in terms of the actual market size, and just a quick whip down here, the biggest one there, as I just pointed out on the initial diagram, is this wastewater and water down here, but onshore wind here is the third biggest market, solar PV of various kinds, small hydro, waste, electric vehicles, geothermal, bioenergy for feedstock, solar CSP, electric bikes. There's a whole range of things which some of you guys will have some experience with, some of you will have a lot of experience with, and some of you won't know anything about. But the point being, there is this big burgeoning, according to the World Bank, opening up market for which there will be large sums of money available over the next 10 years. Of course, a wide range of both clean technology and clean energy technologies more specifically. So what is the role of academia in this? Well, as I said, we're not just academics. Nobody on our database of some 220 people is purely academic. They are working on practical projects. They are working with the private sector. They are working with the NGO sector, with policy community to try and bridge the gap between energy on the one side and development as a social science on the other, in order to try and make projects more effective by bringing to the fore the role of social science in helping you and helping companies like yours amalgamate into markets, to develop markets, financial models, and so on and so forth. And the World Bank report brings out some of these assessments as to why SMEs themselves are more important. This is from a box in that report that the World Bank asserts that there are important niches for SMEs in established clean technology value chains. Well, you guys don't need telling about that kind of thing. But then, okay, so what can academia do for you? The sorts of activity that we're already involved in and people in our database are involved in are things like mapping the value chains, researching local markets, locating these niches that the World Bank talks about, outlining technical, financial barriers and possible solutions. For instance, my PhD was in researching microfinance in Central America back in the day, longer ago than I care to remember. And obviously these days microfinance has come to the fore quite a bit. Those of you who know about the Grameen Shakti, which is an offshoot of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, will know that new financial models, microfinance models specifically directed towards clean energy, is a substantial part of what they do. So there's all kinds of activities going on, all kinds of things that could be useful to SMEs and larger firms respectively, but not a lot of people know about them, and that's part of the function that we're hoping that the LCEDN can perform for ourselves as academics, for the policy community, and for you in the private sector. Second point, SMEs are well positioned to uncover and address opportunities in local clean technology markets. Well, they can be. They aren't necessarily, not even the local ones, but they can be made that way. You guys may not have the capacity to undertake your own research, look at your own markets and so on and so forth, so you simply aren't big enough and don't maybe have the capacity to do that. But there are people who can, and there are certainly people who are looking at those kinds of aspects that we can help try and put you into contact with. Researching and mapping markets, researching business models, helping to identify these opportunities. Again, I'll gallop on down because we're running out. SMEs play an important role in adapting existing technology. We're going to hear from people like Malcolm of the Oxford Energy Group here, who I'm already working on one project as to how that exactly is going to do. Researching local conditions to better understand necessary adaptation, technological research into adapting to local conditions, i.e. how you make, you don't just take a product out to a certain set of socioeconomic structures, but you actually try and adapt to the environment in which the market that you hope to penetrate operates. And innovative SMEs face different barriers to growth. Well, they do. All companies face barriers to growth. There's a whole list of aspects here that that academia, the research community, can help not just yourselves as commercial sector actors, but the NGO sector and government, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment. So without further ado, he said, galloping on through this, we're going to go through Malcolm and Ellie and then Alistair from DFID, who I also work with on a set of projects, who are going to try and explain their own interactions between the research communities, the private sector, policy sector, and the commercial sector. Okay.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm standing here with kind of 2 or 3 hats on. First of all, I am an academic and I'm at Oxford, but I have spun out 3 different companies as well. So I'm acutely aware, that's the last slide. Now you're seeing all my slides in reverse, which is great. Okay. I'm also acutely aware of the pressures that SMEs are put under. And so what I wanted to do was to look at some of the innovation synergies and to say, how do we actually use some of the innovation learning we can do, and how do we exploit academics to help us with that? Because that's what we need to be done. So first of all, just to say, I'm at the Energy and Power Group at the University of Oxford. We've got about 19 people that are all told that are involved in energy and energy issues. The main thing we're interested in is sustainability. This graph here is just a very useful one to kind of set things in context. So along the horizontal axis, we've got the ecological footprint per person in global hectares per person. for different countries, and the vertical axis is a human development index. So basically this is how well life is feeling for you, and this is how much of the planet you're using. The red lines kind of indicate where you should be below, above the human development axis of 0.8 and to the left here. Interestingly, nobody's over there at the moment, and that's the ideal place we should be. Also, we find that if you look at these guys here, if you trend them over time, they tend to do this. That's the trajectory that they move. So the work that we're looking at is basically see how do we take the guys like the US, UK, and the like and bring us down here. But also, what this conference is basically looking at is how do we take these guys, and instead of following a trajectory which is diagonal, how do we make them vertical? So one of the ways of doing this is obviously through SMEs, and that is to say that this is a classic route of developing innovative technologies or innovative services, is that you first of all understand there's a particular need that you want to address. So for instance, we know that a lot of anything between 1.2 and 1.6 billion, depending who you talk to, don't have access to electricity. That's a need. You then have an idea which says, okay, I'm going to make a solar lantern or a solar home system or whatever it is, and then you go out and deploy it in the marketplace and see how it performs. And that's the typical role of any entrepreneur, entrepreneurship idea, which also then feeds into the start of an SME. So where do academics come in? Well, the first thing is that we can actually help understand needs a lot better and really try and dig into some of the ways of framing the right sorts of questions, enable us to understand what the real needs of people are. One of the things that we've learned pretty fast is that actually people don't necessarily know what their needs are in the first place, and that is actually a co-evolution process that needs to happen, but more about that later. One of the frameworks that I find especially useful is a framework developed at Otago University, where when you're trying to understand needs and the way people use energy systems, is basically you've got to identify three big areas. And they're basically saying if you're trying to understand needs, you need to understand these three things. First of all, what are the norms and aspirations that people have? What are the traditions that they have? What are they expecting to achieve, which is neutral of the particular technology that they're using at the moment? Secondly is to say, what is the material culture they have? What do they have access to the moment? Are they using cook stoves? Are they using dates as a stock? What are they actually doing at the moment? And how might that change? The last one is to look at to say, what are their practices? When do they do the cooking? How do they do the cooking? Who does the cooking? Or the lighting, all that type of thing. And one of the interesting questions that we have as SMEs is to say, how do we take it from one particular energy culture where they're stuck using either fossil fuels like kerosene or a lot of bioenergy by using deforestation? How do we move those to a new place? And that's part of that type of question is a key question that a lot of the academic community are using and exploring. And therefore, this is quite a useful framework to engage with academics to say, let's try and how do we use academic activity to understand norms and aspirations or material culture or practices, or how do they all build together? The second thing is to say, okay, so once you've understood the need, how do we use academics to help develop an idea? And you've got to remember that academics are very good at technology readiness levels 1, 2, and 3. One is basically back of a fag packet, or more appropriately these days, back of an envelope type of calculation to say, yeah, that's kind of, this idea will work. And they'll take it to a point where it's a prototype which is suitable to be deployed within a laboratory context, but it's not very good to take it to the next stage. So you've got to remember that the caveats are good at that early stage development, but they're not particularly brilliant at the next stage, which is exactly what SMEs are designed to do. So to give you a typical example, that working with John and Kenya was that one of the things we recognize is that in order to do clean tech, one of the key issues is how do you create a large enough energy source for an energy to create a viable, thriving economic center, and then how to use that to also then power remote homes, which tend to be over long distances. And that provides an interesting challenge, and we're looking at a weakly distributed grid and how to actually go about solving that particular problem. When you come back to it, what we find is that most companies and SMEs are involved, that they start with the need, idea, and deploy. What they then suddenly realize when they've deployed it, it doesn't work. Or there's not enough take-up, and why aren't the customers bashing on our door? And what they realize is that what they've developed is that they've developed something which doesn't address the particular need that customers really need. So one needs to close a loop. In order to do that, you then need to build in a measurement to say, what are the aspects within your particular technology which are working, which aren't, and how do you measure what's going on with a particular deployment of your technology. Third thing you need to, the next one you need to look at is what can you learn from that. So once you've got raw data, what does that actually tell you about what's good and what's bad? And actually what it starts to tell you, it starts to refine what the needs really are and how do they actually go about it. So I'm sure a lot of people 3-4 years ago went around this loop, they got to the deployment and they suddenly found the last mile was really challenging. And so they were measuring things like the amount of units they could sell. They found that wasn't doing very well, and they're finding actually that last mile was a particular challenge, and they needed to understand that the need was not just the person wanting to have a solar lantern, it was that they needed a service network and ability to get it and all sorts of other things which are not obvious to start off with. So academics can help us in all of these by understanding the idea, deployments, less the SMEs, but we can help you understand the measurements of what are the appropriate measures to use, how do you get the learning out of that, and what are the particular, and how does one refine the needs of it. Just to show you a little bit about the bottom one here is a particular aspect that we've been looking at. This is a measurement of an energy system. This is more upper class or higher economic value. But we monitor the energy over a 1 second basis, and that's good and well doing the measurement, but until you can interpret the measurement and understand what people are doing, it doesn't actually help you to say, how do you take it to the next stage. So, in conclusion, let's SMEs and academics work together for a better world. Thank you very much.
How does this work? Okay. Hi. So I think I can move on quite nicely and talk a little bit from a different perspective now. So my name's Ellie and I work for SolarAid. I believe you heard from some of my colleagues this morning. And I'll be talking a little bit about how we do our monitoring and evaluation and research from an NGO perspective and very organisational perspective. Now that's not to say we don't have lots of great relationships with academics, and those relationships are phenomenal when you really have a specific sort of challenge or problem that you're trying to solve. An example of that might be we're at the moment looking into the recycling capabilities of this, and we're working with the University of Edinburgh to do that. So we really do have some very strong research academic relationships. But right now what I'm going to talk about is a project that we ran ourselves in Senegal, and it was a highly monitored project that we wanted to do to learn about the role exposure could play on the uptake of solar lights in rural communities. And I just have to say to begin with, sorry, I'm on the back end of a cold, so if my throat gives way halfway through, I apologise, but I'll try and keep going. So I'm not going to talk too much about SolarAid and Sunny Money because I believe you heard about that this morning, but we are an international development charity based in London, and we have a goal to eradicate the kerosene lamp from Africa by 2020. In order to do that, we've taken a business-based approach. We set up social enterprises in all of the countries we work in, and we're selling solar lights, and we're doing that. Well, Sunny Money is doing that very well. They've sold over 1.3 million solar lights, and over 60% of those have been in sort of the last 12 months, so the growth is really escalating. But the role that SolarAid is then playing in supporting Sunny Money is not only fundraising, but actually doing the research and the monitoring of our activity so that we can take the information that we're learning to feed that back in to support Sunny Money to do things better, but also to help us to form bigger global partnerships, to use that research to really drive policy and advocacy, using Sunny Money as an example of how it can be done well. Very quickly, just because this might be crucial a little bit later on, I'll just touch on our model, and we have 3 stages to how we sell solar lights. Now, the first stage of that is running schools campaigns, and in this phase, essentially, we're equipping teachers to become solar advocates in their community. So we give them solar lights, they go back, they raise awareness in their community, and through this period, we're kind of raising awareness and trust in the products, and the teachers are really crucial because they're a trusted figure in the community. So this is our kind of awareness raising stage. And it's only once we've done that for a fair amount of time, and once we started to sell a few solar lights, that we'll then move to looking at agents and shops and how we equip local people to be able to sell solar lights, because then they can do it once we've already generated that demand. So then they're going to have a profitable opportunity rather than kind of being the ones trying to do that themselves. And finally, we have this period where we call it driving demand even further. So that's all about looking at new ways we can reach people, whether it's pay-as-you-go, whether it's running media promotions, whatever we can do to actually try and further that market growth even more. So research at SolarAid covers a number of things, really. It's monitoring, evaluating our activity, so understanding the impact of our work so that we can report back to funders, crucially, and so we can gain more funding. But particularly, it's about understanding our customers so that we can further meet their needs and we can figure out how to scale our model and understand how the market is changing, as it is changing very quickly. And it's about evaluating our model so we can do things better. I'm not going to talk about this much because I've heard the talk, as I came in earlier, already sort of touched on the benefits of solar lights, and I'm sure that we can understand that. But actually, it's worth reflecting on. So I was at a conference just last month, and I was with a minister from the Ministry of Energy in India, and he said to me, you know, I know when somebody gets a solar light, I know when somebody gets access to energy, they're going to have a better life. I don't need an impact evaluation to tell me that. And you know, it's fair enough. It is an obvious thing. But when we have this information, so we know that families save $70 a year when they no longer have to purchase kerosene to light their home. When Sunny Money sold 1 million lights earlier this year, we could say that actually we would estimate that to be equivalent to $205 million saved by families over the lifetime of those solar lights. And that's fairly substantial. And it's when you can talk in that kind of scalability and with those figures that you start to get the attention of policymakers and you start to get the attention in the debates that you want to be within. And actually in Tanzania in 2013, the money saved by customers who'd bought a solar light was equivalent to 0.05% of the country's national GDP, which, bearing in mind it's only a small fraction of the population that currently have a solar light, is fairly substantial. It just points you towards the potential. And it's really exciting to be able to talk with those sort of figures. But our research really is about understanding our customers, and that's all about market research. So it's all understanding how much people are going to be able to pay for a solar light. 90% of our customers live below the poverty line. We know we're going to struggle to sell lights that cost anything more than $50, even below that. Even a $10 light like this can be a struggle to sell. Currently, they spend about 15% of their income on lighting. Most households own a mobile phone. That's one of the biggest motivations to people wanting to be able to own a solar light. And our customers like to talk. So these are just a few things that I picked out. But we found out that 90% of our Sunny Money customers recommended their solar lights to friends. And it's this kind of social networking that is really important when you don't have established media channels that you can capitalize on. These people are your advertising agency. So actually that is really crucial to the way we sell solar lights. And it's our schools campaigns model where we get the teachers talking to start with that actually is enabling us to scale. So that is quite key. In terms of our model, our research has enabled us to learn 3 key things. That the biggest barriers towards distributing solar lights in rural Africa are affordability, fairly obvious. Availability, again, fairly obvious, getting them to remote rural places. But the third one that took us a little longer to learn was awareness and trust. And again, that was where our teachers come into the model, because as trusted figures in the community, they help us win people over. But what we wanted to play with last year was try and understand, okay, so we know that this awareness and trust is a problem, but what can we do to learn more about it or prove and evidence that this is a challenge that needs to be overcome? And so we ran a light library project in partnership with the World Bank and the Senegalese Rural Electrification Agency in Senegal last year. And so this is very obviously just a library, or what became known as the Luminatek, of solar lights that were donated to 58 schools in a rural region of Senegal. And parents could pay a very nominal fee to take a solar light home so their children could study in the evening. And we did this for a short period of time, and then we went in and we did our usual schools campaign to sell solar lights. And we did this as well. In our schools campaign went into 58 control schools that hadn't had a light library. So then we could compare the results and say, what did this period of exposure to solar lights contribute towards uptake of solar lights? Now, in our control schools, 15% of the school population decided to purchase a solar light. And when you look at sort of general figures for uptake in new markets, that's actually fairly substantial. But in the light library schools, it more than doubled to 35% of the school population. And 70% of those customers told us that the light library had affected their decision to purchase. Now, and actually what was also interesting was, although we tried to compare these, the control region with the light library region, we tried to match them quite to be very similar. Actually, the control region, the families had a slightly higher income and were slightly better off with smaller families. But the light library customers, more of them invested in a $30 solar light that can charge a mobile phone. And in the control schools that were a little bit wealthier, more of them invested in the $10 solar light. So the two kind of key learnings for us here were that people will invest in an economical lighting solution, but this period of kind of exposure, building trust and awareness in the product is really key. And actually, low-income, risk-averse families do want to invest, but it's just that period that can really, really make the difference. So that's just an example from SolarAid of how we try and use research, monitoring, evaluation to really learn so that we can adapt and that we can do things better and that we can scale up and sell more lights, and it enables us to have a bigger impact. So it really matters to SolarAid, and actually what I sometimes find is that market research gets played off against social impact evaluation when actually they're very complementary. They both enable you to learn about your customer, and essentially can be the same thing when we're talking about scalability and increasing access to off-grid solutions. So these are things that can help you can do. You can read that there.
Thank you. I'm Alistair Ray. I work in DFID in the Research and Evidence division, and I'm here with Leanne Jones, who works on our energy and innovation programs. And I think this hopefully builds on a lot of the great stuff we've heard over the course of the day, because I'd like to introduce what we're doing on energy research, and then also introduce a consultation process, which I'd like to take forward. So I've just got a couple of slides really, and go through some of the energy access and innovation drivers, look briefly at our current research and priority themes, and then look how we might scale up the use of renewable energy in developing countries in a transformative way. Because I think we've heard a huge amount about successful innovations, home solar systems, products which have been out there which are showing a lot of impact, but they're facing challenges in terms of accessing finance, accessing technical assistance, regulatory environment, etc. But there are some transformational things which are there as well, which we would like to try to address and take forward. So partly this initiative is to seek a consultation and then see what we might be more ambitious in doing over the next 6 years in terms of our research and evidence work. Obviously, coming from DFID, we're looking at the links between energy, poverty reduction, economic growth. There's been a huge raising of the profile of sustainable energy internationally, and I think the proliferation of different initiatives is good. It's also providing a very confusing landscape for people to work in, and I think some of you SMEs are also struggling with this very confusing landscape. There's a huge growth in demand for energy, and there's a series of challenges around how that's supply response will be organised. And the risks of going down a fossil fuel, a based response, which is actually could be quite quick. In East Africa, there's a lot of new exploration that's coming on stream. So there's real challenges there, and the challenge to try to drive a transformation which will shift the renewable energy provision and systems into a much more affordable space, which could then be scaled up. So we're looking at some of the subsidies, energy security, diversity of supply, energy efficiency issues behind this, and raising awareness of the renewable energy resources and their costs and benefits. And technical innovation and the role of the private sector have a key role to play in this mix. So these are some of the drivers. We've actually got quite a success story over the last few years in terms of DFID funding research on energy. You can see the spend in the orange graph that's over the last 3-4 years has gone up quite dramatically. And the other trend, just to flag here, is that the number of projects that we're doing, it dropped, but we're now seeing fewer but larger projects. And this introduces, I think, some opportunities for us to be more creative. So 5 drivers really that are turning then into our energy and research priorities, picking up on addressing barriers to sustainable energy access for all. And I should just briefly explain, because you can see the points under these numbers, but in ordinary letters they're existing programs, and in italics they are projects, research projects which we have in our pipelines. So a number of you here I think are probably familiar with the USES project, for example, Understanding Sustainable Energy Solutions. We're working with Energia, an NGO in the Netherlands, and their networks on energy and gender. We're looking at energy and productive uses with ESMAP, and feeding in impact evaluations to their proposed state of energy access reports. We've got a new project on green mini-grids, and we're looking to do more work on the humanitarian situations in use of sustainable energy in a more integrated manner. And it was great to hear some of the references earlier on. The second priority area is around climate resilient responses to changing demands on energy. We've got a new project in bioenergy, and looking to see what we could do in a smarter way in terms of meeting the very fast growing demand in urban areas for energy, for electricity particularly. Third area, looking at energy and economic growth and energy efficiency, and seeing what are the policy and the market options to promote sustainable choices in those contexts. Scaling up renewable energy use. And the fifth one is supporting innovation and technology development and business models. So, stepping back from this, I think we've seen the trend to larger projects, and what we would like to do is propose a research program over a 6-year period, which is going to try to seek some transformation. And this is, I think, where you guys can help us in this thought process. And over the next few months towards the end of the year, we will try to develop this program and look at some of the critical evidence gaps around the generation and delivery of low carbon energy. We've got a title, it's not written in stone, but it captures a few things: renewable energy, smarter electricity systems and storage. And we'll be looking at having a complementary but integrated set of research streams, probably a couple of phases, so we can see how things are going across the band and then adjust the funding to back what looks really promising in a second phase and develop that in more depth. So we would adjust this to deliver the transformation we're looking at in increasing energy access and efficiency in energy use, deployment of innovative renewable energy solutions, and also trying to catalyse a shift away from fossil fuel sources. And the outcomes, I mean, you can read them here, but notably trying to seek solutions through the evidence base and the research in solar, storage and smarter systems, energy efficiency, innovative solutions, and the capabilities, the capacity in country to take this to scale. So it's got 4 themes, which I guess I've just really outlined. Scaling up solar, meeting urban demand, promoting energy efficiency and sustainable energy solutions, Scaling up energy innovations. We've heard a lot about energy innovations today, but I think the shift to scaling them up, particularly in terms of delivering a wider panoply of energy solutions to meet productive needs of communities, is a real challenge. So taking that next step forwards and using some of the innovative financing mechanisms we've heard today to take that forwards. And then pinning it together, UK Southern Research Collaboration Capacity Building. So what we're really seeing is sort of a constellation of 4 components which can be adjusted, but each should be mutually reinforcing, and we can see how that goes over time. We've produced a short information note which we can circulate probably through the organisers of this group to you all, and a set of questions which we would be inviting comments on, and a consultation process. And the questions we've got are typically around those 4 areas, and a more general one at the beginning to see if you've got any ideas which are not on this map at the moment. So low carbon energy development, innovation and new business models offer a lot of high opportunities and potential. What are the evidence gaps and market failures that could be addressed through a targeted research programme that complements other ongoing research and could have a significant impact? So that's the wide one. And then we've got some questions that relate to each of these components. I mentioned the first one was very much around solar, but is it right to focus on solar? Should we be looking also at some of the other renewable energy options that are available, microhydro, biofuels, etc.? But the important thing, I think, is to look at an integrated system. So there's the renewable energy source, there's storage, and there's smarter systems, smarter grids to deliver that as a package, and seeing what can be taken forwards there. Energy efficiency, it's one of the goals of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, but very little has been done in developing countries to take this forwards. It's had a lot of traction in the OECD countries. It produces remarkable results and very short payback periods, but it's not having a lot of traction, particularly in the urban environment and with developing country enterprises and industries. So what could be done to make that opportunity more apparent, raise awareness? Are there adjustments that need to be made to some of the innovations, some of the technologies that are taking that forwards? And what role in the innovation space could DFID play, particularly alongside other funders? So there's the venture capitalists we heard, the social impact investors we heard about today. Is there a complementary role for DFID there? And coming back, I think, to the theme of this session, how can research capacity and human resources in developing countries be developed in partnership with UK institutions and other developed country and multinational institutions to best catalyse resources and expertise to meet those challenges. So this really brings us back to, I think, the Low Carbon Energy Development Network and this workshop. It's the last slide. It's been a very good, I think, exchange. We are seeking to build on a number of these workshops over the next couple of months to get ideas in. We've got a framework now to get your ideas on board. We are hoping that we can use the Low Carbon Energy Development Network to host some of the dialogue and the contributions that people can bring in. And we would hope to at least come up with a design framework that we can put for approval towards the end of 2014. Not posing all the questions, but posing the framework, suggesting preferred delivery channels, the sorts of key areas that we ought to be looking at, which then, through the research, can be further explored. So this is not a blueprint, this is a framework that's being developed. Okay, thank you.
Since we've got about 10 minutes or so left, actually, I'd like to kind of invert the normal formula. Instead of inviting you to ask questions, I'd like to throw a couple of questions out to particularly people from the private sector who are still patiently remaining with us, and to say to you, would you like to address us and tell us what are your research needs? How do you meet them currently? And from what we've said, are there any ways that you could suggest to us that we might better help you with those needs? Would anyone like to go for it?
In terms of UK development, we've got support on the research side, though we do need the money to build pilot plants. In terms of overseas, what we're looking at is truly grid-scale electricity storage. So that's enough to back up the renewable power of an entire town, large town or small city and surrounding area at a time. So you'd be looking at, for example, the locations of suitable geologies. We use salt caverns. In order to create the salt caverns, you need to get rid of the salt. So you'd be looking at a co-development of industries that consume the salt in the area, which would also improve the local economy because they have significant industry. Aspects like that.
So you're talking about an integrated approach in which not just the technology, but the sort of socioeconomic structures that surround the sorts of things you're talking about can be integrated into your project.
That, and also extracting from all the salt basins, for example, are only ever found as a byproduct of oil and gas exploration. The oil and gas companies sit on their data because for them it's sensitive where the oil and gas is. But what we want to know is when they've actually drilled through a salt layer, what is it? How does it look like? And governments, DFID, academia are ideally placed to extract that sort of non-sensitive information from the oil companies.
Research needs, wish lists, anything that you would like to see or that you could usefully use?
We work in micro anaerobic digestion, and I noticed that a lot of the things in there, we were talking about wastewater as being high on some of the things, and yet the strategy framework didn't mention that. I'll stick that as an aside. But one of the things, for example, that we find is quite problematic is we're given research funding that can go directly to academics, but as you say, academics only have technology readiness levels, say 1 to 3. So where, for example, you need a bit of capital equipment to be put into the project somehow, and a classic example of this is recently we've been testing some food waste digestate that, and digestate is one of the things in anaerobic digestion that is always a problem with entry to market because people have no confidence about it. So the sort of thing that we were looking at is, yes, we need an academic to do the academic work, but we need the equipment on the ground that does that. And there's no funding that kind of straddles that research. And yet that's quite an important piece of research to develop people's confidence in the byproducts from such systems.
What kind of equipment are we talking about?
Well, we have micro AD units that would be deployed somewhere, and you know, it's just a case of, because AD is a process, the engineering is quite specific. So if it was a thermophilic or pasteurized thing, then it would be quite different than if it was just a normal mesophilic, cheap and cheerful digester, which would be the sort of thing that you'd probably deploy in a place like this.
Not to kind of make you an offer, but you'll be surprised how many technological sections, departments and universities have specialist equipment of the kind that you're talking about. I mean, at Loughborough University, sort of civil and building engineering units, and we have CREST, we have wet out water engineering, that have some very, very specialist kinds of equipment. We have a lot of renewable energy specialists. A guy called Richard Blanchard is a specialist in biomass who, if they don't actually have that equipment themselves, may well be able to locate or...
But that's not the stuff that's deployed on the ground.
Right.
So, you've got your technology lab readiness level stuff that looks like X, but that is not what is deployed in an on-the-ground situation. So that technology that you're trying to deploy will be very specific to it'll be robust and simple and unsophisticated. What you're trying to do is develop confidence. I mean, that's just one example, but...
So I mean, I've lived through this that what they call it, the gap of the death trap between TRL1 and TRL5, or TRL3 and TRL5. The way we get around that is TSB funding. That's a really potent way of getting that type of thing. They're wanting you to move from TRL4 to TRL6 in the space of a year. They will give you, the catch is it's matched funding. Academics come free on them, which is kind of useful, so you don't have to match the funding of academics, which is a big change. And there has been a couple of interesting calls recently on AD work for with the TSB. So I would consider, if you haven't looked at that, that's a place that I would start.
Yeah, sorry.
Johnny Endring, Argaia Wind. One of the things I heard today from the presentations and also from the discussions is, or there's actually two things. One is about finance for projects, finance for new ideas. So maybe something like a white paper, or how to find finance for these type of projects, or for companies working in these areas. The second thing is a lot about business models. I think it was extremely interesting to see how all the companies do their business models and what business models work and what don't work. But they were in a way a bit commercial presentations, and in a way if you would have like Harvard Business School type of case studies with the good but also the bad and the ugly, then you learn a bit more about how to actually market a product in an emerging economy. And especially for energy products, I think it is quite complicated, because you replace long-term operational costs by one-off capital expenditure, and that makes it quite difficult from a business model perspective.
I think as a geographer and someone who's worked in a range of countries in the global south, I would kind of echo what you're saying there, except to say that, as we all know, the informal sector in the global south, that effectively what is the SME sector, is by far the vast mass of the economy in most countries, and that's not likely to change for the very near future, shall we say, if probably in the long term. But it operates in very, very different unregulated, semi-regulated environments, so that SMEs from somewhere like the UK or from the US or from Denmark or wherever going to work in Africa or Central America or Latin America, wherever it might be, experience a real culture shock in terms of the business environment that they're operating in. Formal understandings from business school management, Harvard Business School and places like that, I think would be of limited use. I think that there are certainly people who can help you out with those market environments, but they're very different market environments, and there are certainly development specialists who've done a lot of work in that. But I take your point, and I think that's quite right, that it might need to be more specialist than a kind of more formal analysis would take you.
Just while we're waiting for another question, picking up on finance and the challenge of finance, I'll be very interested to know, of the SME representatives that are here, how many of you are actually actively working through financial intermediaries that are based in developing countries? And why might that be the case, or not the case?
Trevor O'Talman Technology. I think one of the reasons why we don't work in that environment is the margins and things, because for an SME, directors want high margins because they've got to pay back high investment costs. But that's one of the questions I had for you, Alistair, in particular, was about how do you anticipate the UK SMEs will benefit from developing new technology when margins are so small in the third world. It's not going to happen easily for a UK SME. If you've got some high technology, then you need high margins, because it costs a lot of money to develop new technology. And so most companies I know, the business model is you target Europe or America, you don't target the third world, which is a shame, but, economic realities apply in SMEs.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. And obviously going back to the financial intermediaries, they're pricing in the risks, and they're often picking up on working in areas that they're not perhaps particularly familiar with or strong with. So that maybe is where technical assistance can build capacity, can reduce the risk and the margins that they're applying. And I guess on the opportunity side for SMEs, is it not one of scale? I mean, some of the examples we saw and heard about today have rapidly scaled up, and okay, there are initial development costs, small returns, but the ramp up in certain areas has been quite dramatic. I don't know, Leanne, do you want to perhaps pick up on that particular point? Sorry to surprise you, but
yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of UK SMEs that are working in this space, and yes, there are small margins, but they are starting to achieve that scale, and it's becoming a very crowded market space in some countries, Kenya in particular. So I mean, I think yes, there's challenges when there's really very expensive, high tech, and possibly when we're talking about grid-based stuff, we're talking about very different financing structures. But in the off-grid side, there is a lot of opportunities, and there are a lot of UK SMEs that are already there. So.
We're working with Chester University at the moment, and they've got a new science and technology engineering campus, and they're proposing within the next 10 years to develop technology to go completely off-grid. And I'd encourage more universities to actually look at doing that, because it's a bit of a challenge to the students, and it's kind of inspiring in a way, because you're kind of empathising with the situation that third world countries have, rather than, everyone's a little bit lazy in the West because we've still got the grid to rely on and the lights are here. All of a sudden you throw the challenge to students in this country, right, start with solar power, develop storage, and get a smart grid, and do it in the university here and now. If they can do that, that's replicable around the world, and they can actually do it in this country. So I'd encourage universities to actually throw down those kind of challenges to the students in this country, because the students would love that.
Hi, Ian Callahan from Include. I thought all the different themes were great, but what I still feel is maybe missing is a really, really high-level overview of this sector, and who the different players should be, who should be playing a part in its development. So, for example, who are the providers of capital, and who are the most appropriate providers of that capital to very early stage, semi-early stage, later stage companies. I would suggest that microfinance would be a good model to look at, because that has been a very successful, I think, impact investing sector. And there, if you look at it sort of holistically, there were not only a good balance of debt and equity, as I mentioned earlier. There were good networks that were able to connect people together. There was a really great think tank in CGAP, which was able to disseminate good practice. So I would suggest maybe a mapping exercise for this whole sector of who the players are, not just the financiers, but everyone else. And then really try and go to some of those people and say, do you really think you're in the right place on this map? Because I suspect a lot of people just are in the wrong place at the moment, and that's going to really slow things down.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very good point, and we've done some initial mapping, and looked at the investment needs, which are enormous, also the enormous amount of investment that does go in from the multilateral development banks, and yet there are these gaps which are not being filled, and so we have done some, but I take your point that it needs to be drilled down further.
I wish you luck.
It's a perfect cue, isn't it?
I've never had to take over
clever in these circumstances. Thanks, John. Is there a final question for the panel? Just one over there.
Hello, my name's Charlotte. I'm from the University of Nottingham. I sort of just want to bring it back to obviously the title of today's event, SMEs, Clean Energy and Emerging Markets. And obviously we've spoken a lot about electricity and about solar. And Alistair, you were saying about, I'm now going to call it recess, or you're about solar and storage. But what's the long-term impact, for example, if lots of people are using solar lights, especially in the developing world, but they're still burning solid biomass for their cooking and their heating needs? What's the long-term impact for clean energy in regards to that? Because they're using one type of clean technology, but at the same time, that's also going out the window when they're still using firewood and charcoal. So just to throw that in the mix, because we're still looking at solar, electricity, and sort of storage. But I think I think it's very easy to forget that 80% of the developing world are still using solid biomass for additional needs. So.
I can talk about that from a SolarAid perspective in terms of lighting, in that one of the challenges we often get is, you know, well, what this is, yeah, it's modern energy access, but I mean, it's just going to light your home. It's not full grid electricity. But actually, back in the very early days of SolarAid, the thing we started off doing was big macro installations on schools and clinics. And what we learned very soon was that actually 12 months down the line and they'd go completely into disrepair. No one felt they had actual responsibility for them. It was just inappropriate technology. What is exciting about this is that the majority of our customers will purchase one of these straight away, so an $8 to $10 solar light. And then they have this, it comes back to this thing of awareness and trust and building your kind of trust in different technologies and the clean energy market. And we see this as kind of the first step. And once you've got one of these, we find that people then want one that charges their mobile phone. And then once they've invested $30 in something that will do that, then you're kind of looking at what's next. So I'm very much aware that, yes, this doesn't stop people using biomass in the home, and that's actually a bigger contributor to indoor air pollution, all these things. But it might start to get someone thinking about, okay, well, if I can get an alternative for lighting, what's my alternative for cooking? And where am I going to go on this energy escalator? So I think that is a big area for us in terms of research we'd be interested in.
If I could just pick up on that, it's a very good point. And obviously improved cook stoves take several steps along the road, because you're using less fuel, there's less pollution, etc. But actually it's really interesting to see the WHO's latest figures, because if you look at emissions and you link this to the sort of respiratory diseases that come out of the impact of solid fuel cooking, you've got to go a long way down the improvements to actually get some real improvement in health impact. So you've got to be thinking about LPG, pellets, and even induction hobs, and it's really quite interesting. And I think this picks up a point that was heard several times today, this word aspiration. In India, apparently, the sales of induction hobs, as the price has been coming down, have been rocketing up. And this is a clean form of energy. But obviously it brings in then some real challenges about how you then provide the electricity to services emerging demand and market. But yeah, it's a very good point. I didn't really include it in the consultation because we are working with the Global Alliance of Clean Cook Stoves, and also actually with Nottingham University, I think, through the USES programme on cooking solutions. But yeah, it's an important part of the equation.
I'd love to contribute at this point as the representative from African Clean Energy. I'm actually here with my cook stove today. We have a cook stove that actually does work as a device charger and has a LED light that can plug into the stove as well because of the battery power, and it's charged by a solar panel. So perhaps the next step up from $30 for a light that also works as a device charger would be a stove that also lights your home and works as a device charger. And because it is smokeless, it does reduce, because there is a lot of research to show that taking down the indoor pollution slightly doesn't make any difference. You have to really take pretty much all of it out for it to actually have any health impacts. And we're actually working with Kevin Mortimer in Malawi with the CAPS project, which is looking at the results of taking indoor pollution out of the homes and the results on pneumonia. So we're working with him as well. But I kind of wanted to butt in on this conversation because it's rather relevant for me.
Please ring the bell for me now. So we start. Thank you. I'm afraid we'll have to call a halt to today's session and also to the event as a whole. I'm between you and your glass of wine, but first let's thank our panel and John, who had to do a sharp exit.